When Arcane Season 2 released, just like with Season 1, interest in the world of Runeterra blew up. Like big time. It really blew up. And thousands of people found themselves playing League of Legends for the first time, God rest their souls. And by Riot's own admission, almost none of these people stayed. As someone who's been playing League of Legends since back when Dominion was a thing, this was mildly hilarious, but I wasn't really thinking too hard about it. For anyone that plays League, this was almost definitely the expected outcome. You don't tell people to play League of Legends. You don't recommend them to play League of Legends. It's a terrible time. It functions more like a toxic relationship than a video game. But it's not just League. MOBAs have always had a bit of a reputation for not being super new player friendly. They play weird, they're very information and mechanic dense, and the skill floor is pretty high, relatively speaking. They're also just kind of really toxic all the time. They're also a very established genre, right? Realistically, your choices are League of Legends or Dota 2, and both of them have been around for over 15 years and have over 100 characters each. So, outside of a few more niche options, picking a MOBA to play is closer to flipping a coin, and the funny part is that League of Legends is the friendly side of that coin. With its poppy art style and lower barrier to pick up and play, it's always been considered the more casual MOBA when compared with Dota 2, plus the fact that it's done a much better job of leveraging its IP over the years, so it's become a bit more of a popularist MOBA, when compared with the more hardcore audience of Dota 2. So these players not sticking around was an inevitability, right? Like, sticking out with a MOBA it's not for the faint of heart. Well, I've recently had a train of thought that has me thinking that might be at least 15% bullshit. I was playing League with some friends, one of whom is the very definition of a social player. He does not really play the game at all. He just occasionally jumps in the Discord and jams out with some Seraph support, which we do not admonish here because he doesn't know any better. So we're 25 minutes into this game, and he sort of asks the group, when should I have bought boots? Not completed boots, base boots. Brother, like 15 minutes ago, what do you mean? Then in the following game, he's playing Nautilus. Again, he sort of turns to the group and he asks if it would be okay to buy Kainic Rukern next. Now, I don't know what Nautilus is buying Kainic Rukern, but that wasn't the point. It's a tank item that's normally good enough for us. Normally. In this instance, we were up against an entirely AD team and the item would have been completely useless. So we had to ward him off it like the silly sausage that he is for even asking. But why would he know that? It's not like he even knows what the item does. Let's be real, if you're playing a MOBA casually, you aren't reading what they do, and especially if there's a recommended guide feature like there is in League of Legends, you're just following along or whatever one you found on Google. He's not going to understand the magic shield passive, never mind the way it interacts with the damage types of the enemy team. This sent me on the goddamn tirade that has led us here, so today I'll be putting my in defense of new players hat on as I firmly state that the new player experience in League of Legends is bull. Balls. Let me run you through it. You are first presented with these 3 tutorial missions. Welcome to League, Power Up, and Shop for Gear. 3 guesses on what's in that last one. Typically, I would say a segmented tutorial is a good thing, as it seeks to grow your understanding in digestible bites that are less likely to overwhelm you while sowing the seeds of the more complex systems and ideas. The most complex thing you'll see here is the recoil animation. These tutorials will only take you across the most basic parts of this game, stuff like how to move, basic attack, press and upgrade your abilities. It also goes through stuff like last hitting, pushing through to the base, and the act of opening the shop and purchasing items. You know, the parts you need to know to play the game. There's also a random bar in the middle of the screen. And yes, you could argue that is the literal role of a tutorial, but I would argue that that starts a flaccid cop-out. A tutorial is meant to teach, to prepare a player to enter the game as a whole, and in this case enter a battlefield of other players who also should understand the game. I don't think you can be much less prepared than after this tutorial. At the very least, it does teach you how to lane, so it's a good thing no one ever has to play outside of the lane. Son of a... There is not a single mention of the jungle, and I don't even mean the role. It straight up doesn't tell you that it exists. In the tutorial, you are locked into mid lane. You can't so much as do a scenic stroll. Even when it does try to simulate the act of a game, it completely ignores the jungle's existence. There's no mention of the camps, the buffs, the dragon, the Barret, fucking blast plant. It just leaves you so hilariously underprepared to take on a whole, like, fifth of the game, arguably more. And should you choose to try to take on this role yourself, you will start seeing jungle diff in your chat. I guarantee it. That's what I was meant to say. I'm not saying they need to divert into an in-depth explanation of the jungle when they're trying to teach you how to push the enemy base, but the fact that this information is nowhere to be seen is crazy to me when it is so integral to the entire gameplay loop. Even with the lanes, it does a very poor job of explaining the different roles. The AI will take any champ anywhere, also ignoring jungle, to create a 2-1-2 setup, which famously is not how League plays. So going into draft pick for the first time has to feel like getting accused of a crime you didn't commit. I'm imagining fraud. There are just so many fundamental aspects of the game that are completely left out. It doesn't tell you what summoner spells are or how to ward, it doesn't even get close to explaining the different damage types. Some of this is defensible. Tutorials are not responsible for everything, and there is such a thing as too much hand-holding. Plus, when it comes to these ever-present competitive games, there's only so much they can actually account for. So much of the game will end up defined by the players. Stuff like metas, items, strategies, even on occasion what role the character actually slots into, though Riot doesn't tend to let that one stand. And of course, the fact that much of this game will just change over time. But I don't think it's hard to agree that these tutorials simply are not fit for purpose, which is not helped by the fact that this current version of the tutorial was instated back in 2018. That is 7 years ago in a game that sees a major overhaul yearly. There is so much you could update it with, and much of it is practically set in stone at this point. A jungle tutorial of some kind would be a minimum. I think what annoys me more is actually that it doesn't stop at the tutorials. There are very few in-game avenues to find any of this information. Take, for example, what kind of damage a character does. The easiest place to find this is in the tooltip for the ability itself, ever so kindly color-coded to the stat that it scales with. But what about before you actually enter the game? Maybe you want to check a champ you aren't playing or don't have unlocked. I suppose there is the practice tool, but that's a bit lengthy just to check a character's numbers and abilities, so what about the character-specific pages? Not a stat line insight, it's like they want you to use the wiki. This also unearthed a problem I wasn't even checking for. I only picked Yorick because he's toward the top of my masteries because I used to main top lane back in the day. I apologize. And to my horror, I discovered that these ability descriptions are incomplete. There is no mention of the Q recast to summon the graves when there are a certain amount in your radius, or even the fact that it is triggered by there being a certain amount in your radius, or the fact that an E mark will also summon graves around the target before they jump at them. It may seem like a relatively minor issue, but it's just another instance of information being omitted before you actually get into the game, at which point I would argue it's a tad too late to be giving them everything. Also, what the fuck is that? I've never had to pay too much attention to this page, but this bar is immensely misleading. It is meant to display the balance of where your champion's damage comes from, auto attacks or abilities. From that perspective, this is correct. Yorick is an auto attack focused character, but you will be pressing Q like your life depends on it, hence the notch is slap dab in the middle. However, I don't think this was really thought all that through. Both these symbols are the same ones used to represent attack damage and ability power, AD and AP, the two damage types I keep whining about, and the two ways you can scale your champion's damage with items, another thing that is not mentioned in the tutorial. This would give you the false impression that you want to build Yorick with a mixture of AD and AP. You don't. It's such an easy thing to misunderstand, especially when you're not giving any information to counter that. This problem is actually solved in Wild Rift, the League of Legends mobile port, where each character page not only looks a lot nicer, but comes equipped with damage numbers, scaling information, and the ability to see what roles the champion can slot into before you get into draft and have to scroll through the role tab. So Ruffle, Lamau, even, that's what I imagine is said every time a Riot employee has even a passing thought about the tutorial. When this video came to me as a gift from the Arcane, I really did intend on being more constructive. I made a point in my last video about the fact that I'm not a fan of hating on things, especially if it's all I'm doing. My intention was to stroll in and find some key weak points between tutorialization and actually playing the game where the gap was a bit too unreasonable for new and inexperienced players. What I instead discovered was borderline negligence of said players, and Riot finds themselves confused as to why no one is sticking around. I just don't understand. I personally think a lot of this comes down to the in too deep dev problem. You actually see this a lot in like competitive games where they're so used to playing with everything unlocked and not having to play from scratch. The problems forming at the bottom just simply don't come across their desk. It's not like they have a new account running every week. That would be ridiculous. I think there's actually some pretty good evidence of this in the champion prices. Earlier this year, League had a, shall we call it a restructuring of their rewards system. And this caused the Blue Essence, the main free currency of the game, to not work as intended and basically not give you any. Thanks to this, Riot came across an issue that my friends can confirm I have been harping on about for literal years, which is that the champions cost way too much for the average player in League of Legends. Or at least they did, but I'm being dramatic. The cost of champions and the time it took to build up the blue essence required was just far too long if you played only like a few games a week. This put an unnecessary amount of pressure on the champions you chose to purchase, what order you chose to purchase them in, and should you wish to divert from the lane you were playing, good fucking luck. You had stuff like the free weekly rotation, but that really didn't combat it. This is the kind of problem you don't really see from on high, or even if you play fairly consistently. But this is the kind of thing that will turn new players away, because if I want to play the Big Funny Catfish, but I cannot play the Big Funny Catfish anytime soon, I'm going to get fed up rather quickly. So Riot finally caught on as a result of this Blue Essence drought, and they slashed the cost of all champions in half. Not like 10%? Or 20%? Half. Honestly, it's incriminating. By the way, good change, Riot. Very, very fond of that one. Thank you. Keep up the good work. This is what I mean about problems just going unnoticed, because the last time someone at Riot had to unlock a champion, they just put in the admin password. That's my one piece of defense for specifically Riot. We'll expand on that more as the video goes along, but it does not defend the frankly tragic state of these tutorials and the, in my opinion, extremely lacking new player experience. But God forbid I keep this video simple, so I got to wondering how far this problem actually goes. Before we progress, I should make clear that while I have played every other MOBA that will be mentioned in this video, League is far and away the one I have the most intimate knowledge of, so if I get something wrong or I miss something, soz. Either way, that leads us to our obvious next port of call, Hi-Rez Studios' Smite. I am lying to support the structure of the video. More specifically Smite 2, but from what I can tell / remember, all of this applied to the original game. I thought Smite could be an interesting point of comparison, as these over-the-shoulder MOBAs tend to have a pretty radically different player base than the traditional ones, but wouldn't you know it, the tutorials still suck balls and manage to have a lot of the same problems that League's tutorials do. We start off with the arena tutorial. For some reason, for non-Smiters, Smite very much does have the traditional free lane game mode. So it's the standard. It's the standard compared for. I don't know why this is still the default tutorial, is what I'm trying to say. This teaches you how to play the arena game mode through the eyes of Neef, one of the game's original AD carries, in what is once again one of the most bare-bones tutorials I have ever seen. It focuses mostly on the buttons you're pressing, WASD, left click, stuff of that nature. It doesn't go any further than you have abilities before it just gets you to simulate winning a game of arena through the ticket system, which you should be familiar with if you've been playing the new Brawl game mode in League. This does a really good job of twinning with League's tutorials as something that doesn't really help anyone, but there is one more tutorial we must discuss. This one is for Conquest, the regular free lane mode, which I can only assume isn't the default tutorial because the arena tutorial is the one that shows you which buttons to push. It's buried all the way at the bottom of the game mode selection and will also boot up when you try to queue for Conquest, as I found out when I had to play through it twice. Once again, you play as Neef, so I hope you weren't looking for some variety, and once again, similarly to League, it takes the free lanes and locks you into mid. This is primarily about farming, pushing towers, and general lane phase shenanigans until you take the first tower and it tells you to go win the game with some light AI teamwork. Other than that, it shows you very little. No roles, no jungle, it even automatically upgrades your abilities. When it does tell you to recall and explains that you should spend your gold on items throughout the game, it physically will not let you open the shop to check it out, and it certainly won't be explaining it to you. This is another strong instance of a tutorial not going anywhere past the bare bones basics, even on like an optional level. Smite does have sort of an excuse, with Smite 2 being an extremely work in progress build. That said, this arena tutorial was in Smite 1, and that released back in 2014, so while it might be an excuse, it is a really bad one. On the other hand, I did find the new player experience to actually be a bit more bearable than that of League's. As I keep harping on about it, yes, the character pages do have full ability rundowns and damage scaling, which you can also see in full in character select. Honestly, quite poggers. Conquest matchmaking also runs off of a preference system, ensuring you get into matches pretty quickly while still being likely to play something you at least sort of want to play, and even gives you a cute little ping to let you know what lane you're in so you don't get lost. That might sound unnecessary, but I do remember earlier days of Smite and how lower level players would frequently get the lanes mixed up. One advantage of the isometric camera in both League and Dota is that the map stays in the same place and of the same orientation. While Smite does have a god pack to unlock all the characters in perpetuity, which does not transfer from the first game, resulting in a slightly mugged off feeling, you do unlock god tokens on level up. I don't know if there is a cap for this or if this just keeps going on forever, but either way it does allow you to unlock characters very quickly at the start, which I always appreciate. There is also a builds menu. I believe this to be a new addition to Smite 2 that allows you to construct and use guided builds for every character in the game. So if auto build and auto level aren't quite cutting it for you, but you still don't have a lot of experience, you can pin a player's build into your shop and just follow along. This is a great addition, likely taken from the same system in Dota 2. If you want to do something similar in League, you have to turn to third-party websites and software. It is shocking to me that this has not been adopted as standard. So Smite 2 then, it strikes as a bit of a mixed bag, which represents the game extremely well, with a very lackluster tutorial, but arguably a much easier time to stick it out with than it is in League. However, it does still leave new players hideously underprepared, especially in regards to the jungle. So Smite 2 added to our menagerie of misery, it is certainly painting the picture that these games are not adequately serving players in the early stages to really prepare them to enjoy themselves. It feels like they operate with a certain level of assumed understanding of the genre, which practically guarantees that if new players want to bridge that gap to the freaking start line, they will have to turn to external resources. In the age of the internet, that isn't the end of the world. You can just stick new player guide onto YouTube, but it does speak to a level of nonchalance on the developer's standpoint that can lead to new players feeling a touch unwelcome. It's kind of unfortunate then that Dota 2 would come along and just rip my argument to shreds. Would you look at that? It's a thing of beauty. I was almost annoyed when I saw this again. It had been a while, and then this idea I was building up about MOBAs just having this like inbuilt problem where they don't cater to new players very well. Smashed to smithereens in an instance. You don't even need to play through all of this to prove it. Its very existence Spartan kicked me off of a cliff. This is what a really good segmented tutorial looks like. It starts with a video that goes over the sales pitch of the game before it goes into the really basic stuff and includes some Dota specific systems like teleporting and the courier. We have already made up the quota established by League and Smite at this point, and that was tier 1 of 5. I believe the professional term is murder. Even this first tier is simply more impressive with a much higher level of detail. Something I'm also a big fan of is that it culminates in asking you to hop into the new player mode, a generally shorter and simplified version of the game where you can put this stuff into practice. I suppose the League equivalent would be Swift Play, but I'm gonna say that's not really on the level. Each tier then adds a further level of complexity. You start to go through stuff like warding and teamfight initiation into the full last hit exercise tool that can be played with any character, into Roshan, into more specific Dota stuff like invisibility, item setups, disables, and even certain items like BKB which are hard rooted in Dota, and you can revisit any of these at any time. This is a tutorial for a very complex game that actually wants to see you understand it. You'll still have a lot to learn after this, like a hideous amount to learn, but at least it builds a solid foundation that you can start to build off of. It also seems largely up to date. The only thing I can really tell to be missing is some of the newer map objectives. It's just a really smartly designed set of tutorials, and not just in its pacing, but also in its structure. Looking back at the League or Smite tutorials, for the most part, it will attempt to take you through as many concepts as possible in the one instance, and do so as briefly as possible. But in Dota, each lesson is quite specific. When you load into the mission about teleporting, you expect to learn about teleporting, and it teaches you about teleporting. I'm too lazy to do it, but I'm pretty confident you can apply academic learning styles to this, separating everything and making it so the player has to choose to engage with it all, makes it much more digestible and memorable. It is also optional, putting even more onus on the player while also not making them feel like they are slogging through a tutorial. At the end of each step, it will frequently point you towards game modes of increasing complexity to keep the progress flowing and to work you up to a full-fledged game. This is pretty much what I would hope for from a tutorial for any MOBA, and it is also very generous in the information it gives you after the fact. The character screens are chock full of information from stats and abilities and the way you can change or unlock wholly new abilities through items, which is something very specific to Dota. Don't mind how awkwardly I had to read my script there. The guides menu is right at the top there, and it is very extensive, and wouldn't you know it, there's a demo hero button right on the page. I am really struggling to find anything to take issue with here. The broader character select screen doesn't let you search by role, don't groan Dota players, I will get into it, but it does let you search by 700 other filters, including complexity, and you have access to every character right off the bat. Dota has been around for quite some time, seeing its roots span all the way back to Warcraft 3 mods, the birthplace of the MOBA, and in that time it has implemented numerous systems to make interacting with this game as smooth and painless as possible. In League of Legends, we joke about the client working as intended, because it is never working as intended. One time, me and my friends were participating in a Clash bracket. It's a sort of casual tournament they put on for League of Legends. It wasn't working in the slightest. It had gone past like an hour late for searching for matches and it still wasn't working. So we gave up, we pulled out, and we played a normal game, which actively pulls your participation from the Clash bracket. Are we clear? When we got out of that game, without so much as a warning, it started loading the Clash match that we never loaded into, and the other team was actually there. So we had to play it after giving up like an hour ago. It was fucking ridiculous. Point being, the efficiency of the Dota 2 experience was starting to affect me romantically. I'm sure it breaks down after a while or has a bug in it somewhere, I don't know, but when you're used to so much worse, it really makes for a nice change of pace. This raises some questions though, does it not? I mean, Dota 2 isn't exactly a new player breeding ground either. I mean, it's doing fine. It's in a bit of a lull if you look at the player count, but nothing crazy. Yet, as I said earlier, Dota 2 definitely has the weaker general impression. It doesn't have the same viewership or the word of mouth or just the player spikes, whether they stick around or not. So why aren't new players sticking around or even really checking it out? The resources are definitely there and I'd argue they're pretty damn solid. So where's the problem? Well, I'd argue Dota 2's problem is being Dota 2. Now, I'm not here to tell you Dota 2 isn't an incredible game. The simple act of recording for this video has got me dangerously close to wanting to learn it, and I've spent the last 2 days watching Dendy. However, as someone that's played League of Legends for over half my life, Dota 2 is kind of a scary game to approach. It's just so much more dense. I will complain all the livelong day about locked characters, and the grindier it becomes, the more British I get, but there is something to be said about the fear that is struck by Dota's character select. There are so many that it can easily turn into looking for a needle in a haystack, especially when a fair few characters have quite similar silhouettes. This is only exasperated by joining a game to find half the fucking roster banned out, never mind the joys of team composition. The reason you can't filter by role in Dota 2 is because most characters in the game are obnoxiously versatile and can find themselves inhabiting a number of different roles, maybe even making a push for all of them. And this only gets more lax the lower level you are. It really doesn't matter what you pick because you can probably make it work, as long as you somewhat differentiate characters that can carry from characters that can support on the extreme ends, you're probably fine, but even then that's not a good rule of thumb to follow. Of course, this doesn't really match with reality. There is a meta and most characters do have somewhat of an expected position, or positions, I suppose. But that's not really something you have to worry about as a new player. Which, if anything, makes this even more intimidating, because if I have no conditions to meet, then no one is narrowed out. This is in pretty stark contrast to League, where most characters might occasionally wander into a different lane, but it might not last all that long, and even if you get a lane where you don't know who to play, you can just click the filter button at the top for the lane you got, and it will give you the kind of traditional champions of that position. That's another thing. You don't queue for positions in Dota, which is so bizarre to me. Not outside of the specific ranked queue. Anyway, you load into the lobby and you sort of you click the map for where you want to go to sort of claim that position, and all of that was just the character select screen. I should stress that a lot of this goes in Dota's favour in the long term, but when it comes to new players, this is just another hurdle that must be hurdled but before they can restart to enjoy themselves. The game itself can also be quite information overloady. Some characters have an additional ability on default, and many more can purchase an item that unlocks a new ability. Most items are active, meaning you have to press them to activate their effect, leading to a lot of cooldowns and a lot of buttons to manage. There are various objectives, big and small, triggering every few minutes, elevation levels in the day-night cycle and their impact on the game. Never mind the fact that farming is generally harder here than most other MOBAs, and you have no idea what any character on the map is doing, including your own, in a game with an everything is broken so nothing is philosophy. It is maybe a tad similar to bashing your head against a brick wall on first glance. You sort of have to tune out the noise and just pick bits up as you go along. But by the time you've seen that wall up close, the damage has already been done. Even that tutorial page, if you saw 5 pages of tutorials, what are you doing? Valve also just straight up doesn't really push Dota at all. They stay mostly hands off with external events. Esports, for example, the International is dropping off year on year, but League's year ending Worlds tournament gets poor souls like myself to play the game again on an annual basis while hitting pop off numbers. So to summarize, Dota 2 creates an interesting counter argument. Having one of the best tutorials I've seen in a competitive multiplayer game, it does not fit this idea that it poorly prepares players for the game to come. However, it just is such an intimidating experience that it struggles anyway. Its tutorial could be a award-winning motion picture, and it still wouldn't get people to play Dota. A bit like Arcane. Or Dragon's Blood, actually. But as the foundations of my argument started to crumble around me, a central pillar arose, and oh, if only someone would talk about it in the 4th chapter of their YouTube video essay. I must admit, I fibbed. As I said I did. Dota 2 was the first place I went after League of Legends. I mean, where else would you go? It's the other side of that coin. Statistically speaking, if you play MOBAs, the chances are it's either League or Dota. But upon refreshing my memory of Dota, which I hadn't played in like 3 years at the time, it didn't exactly fit the thesis. This wasn't a problem though. I was already setting up to counter my own argument, as I often like to do. I am a Libra, after all, and this only served to deepen my thoughts on the matter, and the conclusion I came to is that you can't blame all of this on the tutorials and the new player experience. A lot of the fault for the new player woes of MOBAs belongs to the genre of MOBAs. I'm going to assume that most people watching this video do be gamers of some description, but the beautiful thing about video games is they come in so many different shapes and sizes. So even if you don't play MOBAs, you probably know what they are. So what do you think about them? When you think about League of Legends as a non-League player, what comes to mind? Because I seriously doubt you're thinking to yourself, wow, League of Legends is so cool. Those League of Legends players are so cool. I wish I could play such an interesting game like League of Legends and be as cool as those cool League of Legends players. Feel free to send me a redaction if that's wrong, even ignoring the fact that you likely imagine the average League player to be at least a little racist. MOBAs don't have spectacular optics in the casual market. They're competitive games with a lot going on, but most importantly, they're really weird. Take shooters, for instance. First person, third person, arcade, tactical, Call of Duty to Counter-Strike. They have a lot in common. The most important thing is point and shoot. They often control more or less the same, with stuff like mouse sensitivity and DPI being pretty transferable between games for people that care about that stuff. You're probably moving with WASD and shooting with left click. They also typically utilize the same game modes, with bomb / search and destroy, whatever you call it, becoming the typical competitive mode. Even when a shooter enters a new genre like the Battle Royale boom, the basics are still the same. Accompanied by their long history on console, this has led shooters to be probably the most accessible genre in gaming, especially if we're talking competitive multiplayer, then it isn't even close. This is a lot of why hero shooters took off the way they did. They took the best parts about MOBAs, the abilities and hero identity, and put it into a gameplay model that's so much easier to pick up and play, creating a nice middle ground for people that wanted more depth in their shooters, but don't want to spend 15 minutes farming. This transference of skill is a major part in the accessibility of genres. For another example, just look at the demystification of Soulsborne games to the point where they've become a pretty well understood entity as of Elden Ring. MOBAs and some other fringe genres like fighting games don't have that transference of skill from outside of their own genre, which is what creates this perception that they are harder to learn and harder to access. Remember when Deadlock first went public? Everyone and their mother's pet Highland cow was playing it. Obviously, there were many factors, such as FOMO and the fact it was a massive new Valve project, but let's not forget the way it pulled an Uno reverse, putting the shooter elements of a hero shooter back into a MOBA to create something that not only had never really been seen before, but was also far more accessible to people from outside the MOBA genre. No other genre is teaching you how to do a DP in the same way no other genre is teaching you to leverage your level 3 power spike. Though I do agree that if you can do Helldivers prompts in mid bombing run, then you can do a DP. So if we go all the way back to those new Arcane fans, and they see that their show is based on a game called League of Legends, and they make the mistake of thinking to themselves, I'm going to try that game, they're going to be looking for a game that allows them to interact with these awesome characters and has the bombastic stories that Arcane is known for. Instead, they shall find a hellscape, where you have to ride the edge of carpal tunnel to move accurately. You spend most of the game hitting AI minions, and there's this thing called a tower that ruins my fun every time I try to kill someone. And that's even if they make it to the Summoner's Rift in the first place. That extra disconnect of having never played a MOBA before is just the icing on the cake, and is a lot of why the MMO is being seen as the second coming of League of Legends. MOBAs are a weird genre that come with a lot of early roadblocks if you aren't prepared to stick it out. They're very punishing, and they come with a lot of sources of early frustration, so realistically the chances of new players sticking it out are already quite slim. My point is not that by creating better tutorials they would just magically fix their issues with player retention. My point is that it would remove one or two of the hurdles and put new players in the best position possible to see if they even like the game, without that added frustration of just having no idea what's going on. Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot of choices for MOBAs outside of League or Dota, especially in the more casual sphere outside of like Pokemon Unite. And from what I've seen, they all fall into the camps we've discussed in this video, where they're either pretty bad at teaching you the game, they might be very good at it, but the game is just really hard. They might have a bad tutorial and the game is very hard. Both is good. Both works too. If you are interested, but League or Dota don't really suit your style, float your boat, as it were, I will leave some alternatives at the very end of the video. As someone who tends to play a wider range of games, but for less time overall, I find myself very fascinated by the new player experience in games, because I can get the gist quite easily, but how well does it teach someone who plays games like an hour a day? Obviously, MOBAs are aimed at the people that are going to spend hundreds of hours just replaying and replaying and replaying, but I don't think we should forget the humble casual, and that is the purpose of this video. This video was a weird one because it also works for the other fringe competitive genres. You can just swap out the games and make the exact same arguments. Some suck at the teaching level, some just have a really high floor, and a lot of it comes down to inexperience with the genre. It's why I brought up fighting games earlier, because this is a conversation that goes around the FGC every other Tuesday. But I want as many people as possible to be able to enjoy these games, because at the end of the day, that is the point. That is what they're there for. So while I'm quite confident that no one at Riot is ever going to see this video, you might want to take a look at your tutorials, because not everyone has a friend that's there telling them when they should be buying boots. Thank you for watching the video. If you made it to the end, it got a lot bigger than I was planning for it to. But I'm quite happy at how it turned out. The foundational experience of playing games is something I'm really interested in, and I'm sure this won't be the last time I talk about it. I also made this video with 90% extra spite, which is a lot of how it even got out as quickly as it has. Because it might look like it took me 6 weeks, but it actually only took me 3, because 3 of those weeks were spent working on a whole other video that I had to set fire to because I got fed up of it just cock blocking me at every stage. So please like, comment, and subscribe. Comment if you feel like it. And I specifically want to hear from you if you have actually tried to play MOBAs, but felt that roadblock because it just doesn't teach you anything. Let me know. I learned League of Legends back when I was like 11, so I can't really remember what the problem was. I'm currently in the throes of Expedition 33 and greatly enjoying myself, and I'm cooking up ideas. So there's a good chance the next video will be something Expedition 33 related. We'll see. And I'll see you in the next one. As for those recommendations, there's Pokemon Unite if you're looking for something on the more casual side. It's less siegey, more arcadey as you look to literally dunk on the opponent. Being aimed at Pokemon fans, it's nothing crazy on the complexity front, but they do have some fun characters, a neat like dual upgrade system. You'll get it when you see it. And there's a decent amount of skill expression. Plus, it's Pokemon. That's a win. If it's a win, you know who you are. It seems to get updated pretty regularly with new Pokemon every 2 months. Admittedly, it is getting canned in Belgium and the Netherlands specifically. The actual reason wasn't given, but apparently people think it's because of strict loot box rules over there. So the game is still there and probably not going anywhere anytime soon if you want to play it. You just can't if it's Belgium or the Netherlands past November. And of course, it's on Switch and mobile, so it's a pretty good portable option. Same with Wild Rift, actually, just on mobile, but good for a portable option. Then there's Predecessor. That has a funny little backstory. Epic Games had a MOBA called Paragon back in 2016. And they never said this was why they killed it, but they killed it because of Fortnite. One thing they did do that was kind of cool, though, was when the game shut down, they released all the assets for free, and they just kind of said, go ham. They basically told someone to remake it. And Predecessor was the one that ended up on top. It came down to 2 of them, but Predecessor was the one that made it in the end. Outside of Deadlock and Smite, it's the only other over-the-shoulder MOBA I know of with some very crunchy gameplay and probably boasting the most intensive graphics of a MOBA. So if that works for you, it works for you. I haven't played much, but I do remember it being pretty fun, and it still gets updated quite frequently. They've also started introducing original characters, which is quite cool, which includes this mechanized bear named Boris. Because why else would you name him? You can find that on Steam. There's also Heroes of the Storm, which isn't dead? News to me. Apparently the esports scene got axed and it created this false interpretation that the game was being shut down or something. I don't know. I just know that in the process of looking at stuff for this video, I came across a beginner's guide from 2 weeks ago and it had a good chunk of views. So I was like, what the fuck? Fucking hell, what's getting on here? Apparently the fan base has also convinced themselves that at BlizzCon next year, there's going to be some kind of revival of some kind for Heroes of the Storm, which is super conspiracy theorist as far as I can tell. But hey, it might make its way out of its shallow grave, so it might actually be worth playing. But what actually is it? Heroes of the Storm, or HOTS as it is otherwise known, is a Blizzard MOBA with all their properties. So Warcraft, Starcraft, Diablo, Overwatch, all of those bungled into one. The main appeal of HOTS is they tried to take out a lot of the sort of smaller micro elements and refocused on team fighting and objective gameplay. So stuff like last hitting, the laning phase, stuff like that is swapped out for team-wide XP and objective focused maps. There's a bunch of maps with different objectives on them, which is pretty cool. So basically they went for variety and replayability over whatever the traditional MOBAs are trying to do. I haven't really played HOTS. I think I played 2 games of it way back when, but I do know people that stand by this game. So if the rumors of a revival are true, now could actually be a pretty good time to be looking at HOTS, especially if you like the idea of MOBAs and their gameplay, but you don't like the more tedium-ish aspects like laning and stuff. The biggest obstacle to playing HOTS will actually be installing battle.net, which I only do to check on Overwatch once a year. And finally, the one highest on my personal radar, Sirocco. I do not know if that's how you say it, but it is what I'm going with. I've seen it described as boat Dota, which is actually a pretty solid comparison. It also has its roots back in Warcraft mods. I believe this one was called Battleship. It's being developed by a pretty small team, and it's much more about map control and smart macro play than it is about itty-bitty specifics, and you've got a wide breadth of options at your disposal. One of their big mottos is no rules, just fun, and they've certainly followed that through. You don't lock in a character, or I guess ship, in Sirocco. Everyone starts as the same character, and as you sort of make your way up through the abilities, you unlock more ships. Same with weapons, which fire automatically as long as you're in range, and you more pick them for the effects that they come with, while all the abilities are skill shots. Like I said, you're not logged into anything at any point. If you go back to the harbor, which is this game's version of the fountain, you can change your ship, you can change your weapons, you can also respec your ability upgrades, which is kinda neat. It's a decision-making game, but it's one where your decisions aren't stuck with you if your decisions were bad, which is a truly novel concept for a MOBA. It feels really nice to play and it's got a really cool aesthetic. It's only very recently entered early access, so it has a long way to go. But I've certainly got my eye on it, and I would recommend you keep one little peeper on it yourself, if you get what I'm saying. Only problem, doesn't have a huge player count right now, so it can take a hot second to find matches, especially if it's not at like peak times, so beware. Okay, that really is all I've got, so have fun. Go play some MOBAs. I swear they can be enjoyable. And if you see me playing League of Legends after this... No, you didn't. Shut up. Someone might hear you.